waste time on people who didn't mean anything to him and never would. Billy was different, and he knew it from the first time she spoke to him. The surprising thing about her was that he liked hearing her talk about anything. Her daily routine in Mantoloking, her two grown children, Andrew, a freshman at Rutgers, Carrie, a senior at Monmouth High, the ocean tides and how they affected surf casting for blues, half a dozen other things. In addition to the house-sitting, she still worked full-time as a nurse. She was in the emergency clinic and specialized in adult trauma. She'd flown in medevac helicopters to the larger trauma units in Newark and Philadelphia. Once upon a time, she'd even worked as a MASH unit nurse. They didn't discuss her husband until after dinner. Sampson brought the subject up again. It had gotten cooler, and they'd moved back into the living room. Billy started a fire, which was crackling and popping and warming things up inside. "Do you mind if we talk about Lawrence for a few more minutes?" he asked, as they sat together on a small couch near the fire. "We don't have to do this now if you don't want to." "No, it's okay. It's fine, really. That's why you came here." Suddenly, something caught Sampson's eye. He rose up from the couch and walked to a glass case near the fireplace. He reached inside and took out a straw doll. Now this was very strange. He examined it closely. He was sure that it was a replica of the one he'd seen in Ellis Cooper's house. It scared him because it was in Billy's house. "What is the doll doing here?" "What is it?" she asked. "What is that creepy doll? I don't remember seeing it before. Is something wrong? You look so serious suddenly." "I saw this same doll at Ellis Cooper's house," he admitted. "It's from Vietnam. I saw lots of them in villages over there. Something about evil spirits and the dead. These dolls are bad medicine." She came over to the glass cabinet and stood beside him. "May I see, please?" She examined the straw doll and shook her head. "It looks like something Lawrence might have brought home, I suppose. A souvenir, memento mori. I honestly don't remember ever seeing it, though. Isn't that strange? Oh, that reminds me. The other day I found a big, ugly eye in that same cabinet. It was so evil, I tossed it." Sampson held her gaze. "Strange coincidence," he said, shaking his head. He was thinking that Alex refused to believe in them. Coincidences. "As far as you remember, your husband never mentioned Sergeant Ellis Cooper?" he asked. Billy shook her head. She seemed a little spooked now. "No, he rarely talked about the war. He didn't like it when he was there. He liked it even less once he came back and had time to think about his combat experience." "I can understand that. When I got back to D.C., I was stationed at Fort Myer in Arlington for a couple of months. I came home in my dress greens one Saturday. I got off a bus in downtown Washington. A white girl in bell-bottom jeans and sandals came up and spit on my uniform. She called me a baby murderer. I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. I was so angry that I turned and walked away as fast as I could. The hippie girl had no idea what was happening over there, what it's like to get shot at, to lose friends, to fight for your country." Billy clasped her hands together and slowly rocked back and forth. "I don't know what to tell you about Lawrence. I think you probably would have liked him. Everybody did. He was very responsible, a good father to our children. He was a thoughtful, loving husband. Before he died, and I'm talking 20 minutes before he was executed, I sat with him in the prison. He stared into my eyes and said, 'I did not kill that young man. Please make sure our kids know that. Make sure, Billy.'" "Yeah," Sampson said. "Ellis Cooper said something like that, too." It got quiet in the living room, a little uncomfortable for the first time. Finally, Sampson was compelled to speak. "I'm glad you called, Billy. Tonight was great for me. Thank you. I need to go now. It's getting late." She was standing beside him, and she didn't move. Sampson leaned down and kissed her cheek. God, she was tiny. "You do think I'll break," she said, but then smiled. "That's all right." She walked him out to his car. They felt compelled to talk again, mostly about the night sky over the ocean, how expansive and beautiful it was. Samson got into the Cougar and Billy started to walk back to the house. He watched her and he felt sorry that the night was ending and he'd probably never see her again. He was also a little worried about her. How had the straw doll gotten into her house? She stopped at the stairs to the house, one hand on the banister. Then, almost as if she'd forgotten something, Billy walked back to his car. She said, then stopped. She seemed nervous for the first time since they'd met. Unsure of herself. Samson took her hands in his. "I was wondering if I could have another cup of coffee," he said. She laughed lightly and shook her head. "Are you always this gallant?" Samson shrugged. "No," he said. "I've never been this way in my whole life." "Well, come on back inside." Chapter 56. It was almost midnight, and Jamila and I were up to our necks in the shimmering mountain pool that looked down on Phoenix in the distance, and on the desert up closer. The sky over our heads seemed to go on forever. A big jet took off from Phoenix, and all I could think of was the tragedy at the World Trade Center. I wondered if any of us would ever be able to look at a jet in the sky without having that thought. "I don't want to get out of this water, ever," she said. "I love it here. The desert sky goes on and on." I held Jam close to me, felt her strong heart beating against my chest. The night desert air was cool, and it made being in the pool feel even better. "I don't want to leave here either," I whispered against her cheek. "So why do we do what we do? Live in the big city, hunt killers, work long hours for low pay, obsess over murders?" I looked into her deep brown eyes. Those were good questions, ones I'd asked myself dozens of times, but especially during the past few months. It always seems like a good idea at the time, but not right now. "You think you could ever quit? Get past the adrenaline? The need to feel what you do matters?" "I'm not sure that I can, Alex." I had told Jamila that I was probably going to leave the police force in Washington. She nodded and said she understood, but I wondered if she really did. How many times had she faced down killers? Had any of her partners died? "So," she said, "we've been beating all around it. What do you think about us, Alex? Is there hope for two cops off the beat?" I smiled. "I think we're doing great. Of course, that's just me." "I think I agree," Jamila smiled. "Too early to tell for sure, right? But we're having fun, aren't we? I haven't thought about being a detective all day. That's a first." I kissed her lips. "Neither have I. And don't knock fun. I could use a lot more of it in my life. This beats solving homicides." "Really, Alex?" She grinned and pulled me close against her. "Is this good for you?" "Well, it's good for me, too. That's enough for right now. I love being here. I love tonight. And I trust you, Alex." I couldn't have agreed more. At a little before midnight, in the mountainside pool overlooking Phoenix and the sprawl of the desert. "I trust you too," I said, as the big American Airlines jet passed right over our heads. Part 3. The Foot Soldier. Chapter 57. I got back to Washington on Sunday night at 11. There was more of a bounce in my step and a smile plastered on my face. I'd forgotten about the rigors of the murder investigation for a couple of days, and Jamila was the reason why. Nana was waiting up in the kitchen. What was this? She sat at the table without her usual cup of tea and without a book to read. When she saw me come in, she waved me over and gave me a hug. "Hello, Alex. You have a good trip? You say hello to Jamila for me? You better." I looked down into her brown eyes. They seemed a little sad. Couldn't hide it from me. Something's wrong. Fear had grabbed at me already. Was she sick? How sick? Nana shook her head. "No, not really, sweetheart. I just couldn't sleep. So, tell me about the trip. How was Jamila?" she asked, and her eyes brightened. Nana definitely liked Jamila. No hiding that either. "Oh, she's good, and she says hello, too. She misses everybody. I hope I can get her to come east again, but you know, she's a California girl at heart." Nana nodded. "I hope she comes back," she said. "Jamila is a real strong woman. You've met your match with that one. I won't hold it against her that she's from out west. Anyway, I guess Oakland is more like D.C. than San Francisco, don't you think?" "Oh, absolutely." I continued to look into Nana's eyes. I didn't get it. She wasn't giving me a hard time the way she usually does. What was up? We were quiet for the next minute or so. Unusual for us. We usually jabber back and forth until one of us surrenders. "You know, I'm 82 years old. I never felt like I was 70 or 75 or even 80. But, Alex, suddenly I feel my age. I'm 82, give or take." She took my hand in hers and squeezed it. The sadness was back in her eyes, maybe even a little fear. I felt a lump in my throat. Something was wrong with her. What was it? Why wouldn't she tell me? "I've had a pain lately in my chest. Shortness of breath. Angina or whatever. Not so good. Not so good." "Have you seen Dr. Rodman? Or Bill Montgomery?" I asked. "I saw Kayla Coles. She was in the neighborhood treating a man a few houses down from us." I didn't understand. "Who's Kayla Coles?" "Dr. Kayla makes house calls in Southeast. She's organized about a dozen doctors and nurses who come into the neighborhood to help people here. She's a fabulous doctor and a good person, Alex. She's doing a lot of good in Southeast. I like her tremendously." I bristled a little. "Nana, you're not some charity case. We have money for you to see a doctor of your choice." Nana squeezed her eyes shut. "Please listen to me and pay attention to what I'm saying. I am 82 and I won't be around forever, much as I'd like to be. But I'm taking care of myself so far and I plan to keep doing it. I like and trust Kayla Coles. She is my choice." Nana got up slowly from the table, kissed me on the cheek, and then shuffled off to bed. At least we were fighting again. Chapter 58. Later that night, I went up to my attic office. Everyone was asleep and the house was quiet. I liked working when it was peaceful like this. I was back on the Army case. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Didn't want to. The bodies painted in bright colors, the eerie straw dolls, the even spookier all-seeing eye. Innocent soldiers punished by wrongful executions. And who knew how many more soldiers might be scheduled for execution? There was plenty of material to go through. If even only some of these executions were linked, it would be a huge bombshell for the Army. I continued my research, did some spade work on the straw doll and the evil eye. I did a search on LexisNexis, which held information from most local and national newspapers, and the major international ones. A lot of detectives underestimate the usefulness of press research, but I don't. I have solved crimes using information passed on to the press by police officers. I read reports about a former private first class in Hawaii. He'd been accused of murdering 5 men during a sex, slavery, and torture spree that occurred from 1998 to 2000. He was currently on death row. I moved on. I felt I had no choice but to keep going on the case. An Army captain had killed 2 junior officers in San Diego less than 3 months ago. He'd been convicted and was awaiting sentencing. His wife was appealing.